Good afternoon, folks. Good afternoon, colleagues. It's a pleasure to be here. So I'm Wim de Villiers. I'm the Rector and Vice Chancellor of Stellenbosch University. I'd like to thank everyone involved with the Africa and the World Festival for choosing Stellenbosch and today Stellenbosch University to host this spectacular event. It's really an honor to be involved. In particular, I'd like to thank Deli Olojedi for your invitation and for this year's inspiring program, and to Wole Soyinka, who's the guest of honor for this event. I'm here to briefly give context about the university, and then I'll hand over to the distinguished novelist Okey Ndibe in conversation with Nobel laureate Wole Soyinka. And this is something I can tell you I've personally looked forward to for quite a while. So there's a confluence between transformation at Stellenbosch University and the transformative nature of the Africa in the World Festival. The festival's purpose is stated to platform invigorating ideas that can spark connections, engagements, and actions that can bring fresh changes and sustainable solutions to African people, close quote. And part of Stellenbosch University's vision is to advance knowledge in service of society. So our mandates clearly overlap. And during the past few years, we've thoroughly established ourselves as an institution that's rooted in Africa with a global outlook. And according to the UN, more than half of global population growth between now and 2050 is expected to occur in Africa. Africa has the highest rate of population growth among major areas, and the population of sub-Saharan Africa is projected to double by 2050. So we must invest in the people of our continent, not only to showcase our intellectual capacity, but to assist and in many cases lead the world in solving some of the most pressing issues of our time. In other words, at Stellenbosch University also, we have to ask ourselves not only what we're good at, but what we're good for. And at our institution, we've recently established a school for data science and computational thinking, and a school for climate studies. And earlier this year, we proudly opened a cutting-edge biomedical research institute, a state-of-the-art facility that has the capacity to conduct groundbreaking research in the field of biomedical sciences. And this represents a new way of doing science on the African continent, an equitable way. It is a symbol of our commitment to using science and research to create a better future for all. And we believe that this research institute will be a catalyst for change, leading the way in the fight against disease and promoting the health and well-being of people throughout our continent. Furthermore, the fact that from last year, the Nobel Foundation chose Stellenbosch University and the Stellenbosch Institute for Advanced Study, or STIAS, to host the Nobel Foundation's Nobel in Africa Symposium series, the only such event outside Scandinavia. Last year it was on quantum physics, this year it will be on chemistry. And this really says something about our global positioning and our ability to be in service of society. These developments provide a unique opportunity to support and showcase advanced research and scholarship on the African continent, and to promote research excellence and collaborative scholarship in Africa in conversation with the rest of the world. Because as an institution, as a university, we want to be relevant to the people of our country, continent, and the rest of the world, and we want to make a meaningful contribution that will take humanity forward. And this week, with the Africa in the World Festival, this conversation continues. Intellectual investment in our continent makes sense, and people like Wole Soyinka one of the global thinkers of our time, proved that. As a dramatist, novelist, poet, and public thinker, he has influenced how the international community looks at the world, how we engage with others, and through his work has shifted perceptions about Africa. I don't have to tell you the world is in flux, and in many parts, it's in turmoil. We need more voices like his in these times, voices that can illuminate and lead. And last year, I started one of my speeches with a quote by Wole, not knowing that we'll have the opportunity to host him today. And the quote says, "No one is rich enough to buy yesterday, but if you hustle hard, tomorrow could be yours." Now is the time for African researchers and African thought leaders to hustle, to put in the work, to ensure that generations to come will benefit from our labor and that Africa takes up its rightful place in global intellectual spaces. Thank you, and I very much look forward to the conversation. Thank you.
This is my better ear.
Okay, so lovely. All right. Well, I'm going to start by saying good afternoon. We're going to have to do better. All right, this is Africa, isn't it? All right, so we do return greetings, don't we? So I want to hear back from you. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Aha, now you're talking. By the way, just a quick procedural matter. I do have a bottle of water, but anybody who knows anything about Wole Soyinka knows that wine is his water. And so I don't know if you want a glass of wine.
If you want to use me as a
To get
yes.
So that's it then. Okay, so yesterday and much of today, a lot of speakers began by establishing their bona fides around Dele Olojode. There were friends of Dele, and I just want to announce my own bona fides that I'm actually what you call BBOD. That's Big Brother of Dele Olojode. All right? And Dele has stopped contesting that that I'm older. You know, we actually had to Google before he accepted. So I have a lot of questions, but it's such a delight and for me such an honor to be invited to anchor this conversation. In a lot of ways, Wole Soyinka and I have been in conversation with Wole Soyinka since my secondary school days. When my father bought a copy of your prison memoir, the man died. And I got it into my head that I was going to grapple with Soyinka's work. Let us say that it took 20 years of recurrent reading before I began to really understand that book. But on the first reading, there were two phrases at least that have since shaped my ethical and intellectual evolution. The first one was Soyinka's statement that the man dies in all who keeps silent in the face of tyranny. In the spirit of inclusivity, I'm going to rephrase that as the human dies in all who keeps silent in the face of tyranny. Then later in the book, Wole Soyinka says that justice is the first condition of humanity. So those are two sayings that I think we are particularly salient in the world that we inhabit today. Professor Soyinka, I'd like to begin by focusing on two scandals in which you are uniquely implicated, if you don't mind. Earlier this morning at breakfast, somebody was asking me, where is Soyinka based now? And my answer was, in Nigeria. But I said the better answer is that Soyinka lives somewhere in the air, because this man travels with the frequency and rapidity and tirelessness of somebody in their 20s. So the first scandal for me is, where do you find the energy at this age to continue this momentum that you've maintained all your life of frequent traveling? Wine, please. And 2 glasses will help.
We have begun with a very difficult question, because the question was phrased thus: where do you find the energy? And I think that's wrongly phrased, because I'm not aware of having the energy. So how could I be aware of something I haven't found?
Yes.
You created a problem for me there.
Yes.
I think it's other people's energies which find me, where I'm sitting quietly minding my own business. And I've come to the conclusion that for surrendering to so much, such a bombardment of energies all around me, that it proves one thing about me, that I'm a closet masochist. And that's the confession which I have for you, because I don't understand myself how I happen to be on a plane when I have sworn that I'll be in my forest home for the rest of that year. But somehow or the other, I get dragged out like this. Ask Dele what I've done to offend him. But he drags me here to South Africa, which from time to time I've sworn I would never return to because of harassment by immigration officers. But here I am again. I think it's the wine.
It's the wine
that does it.
Yes.
But before you go on further, Mr. Vice Chancellor, I'm very sorry that I have to begin by contradicting you. You see, part of the problem, which I hope we might touch upon, is the menace of social media. I had a team working for me. I got so tired, so exhausted, that I had a small team and said, please go around and see just how many blogs I run, how many Facebooks I run, how many WhatsApps I run, how many hi mama, hi papa, hi dad, or whatever goes on later, I'm supposed to be running. They went and I think they found about at least a dozen. None, not one was mine, because I don't face, I don't enter whatever it is. For me, that mechanism, that technology exists for 2 things: my email and some texts. Outside of that, I don't. And yet, there was one in particular which was entitled 47, I think, or 41 famous sayings of Wole Soyinka. And out of 41, 27 I'd never even heard of. Mr. Vice Chancellor, you cited one of them.
Wow.
So let's go. I thought I'd begin with that because I don't know what other quotations will be attributed to me for me to deal with today.
Yes.
So,
all right. So let's get to another scandal. And this is what I call the scandal of sustained productivity. lots of writers complain of this malaise, this disease of writer's block, and I exemplify it. And yet, every day, every year, as it were, you continue to produce work in a variety of genres. In the last 3 years alone, you have produced a novel. And I remember that when I was interviewing you for a book, which I titled The Man Lives, a conversation with Wole Soyinka on life, literature, and politics, I asked him the question. I said, have you not been tempted to do another novel? Because his last novel had been 40-something years ago, Season of Anarchy. And he said, I'm not going to answer the question. And I framed the question a different way, and he says, don't even try, I'm not going to answer the question. It turns out that he was on the cusp of finishing a novel. And he suspected that I knew about it, and that's why I asked the question, but I didn't. So that novel, a chronicle of the happiest people, the chronicles of the happiest people on earth, came out, I think, 2 years ago. Just last year, your Nigerian publisher who is here, Bankola Olayebi, came out with 2 huge volumes of your essays. And then I was in Nigeria in March, in time to introduce you at the launch of your collected poetry. So you continue to produce. And so the next question is this scandal of just incessant productivity. When are you going to retire from writing?
Well, I have good news for you. I've been working at retirement for a number of decades now. Eventually, I'll probably sit for an examination and get my Bachelor of Arts in Retirement Studies, and then move on to PhD. And then I'll become probably emeritus professor in retirement strategies and tactics, because I've learned quite a lot about retirement without ever retiring.
Yes.
Or more accurately, as a result of having retired at least 24 times. So it isn't that I deliberately lied to you.
Yes.
No, it's just a self-defense instinct. In case I didn't pass the retirement exams, I then have to pretend, at least satisfy myself, that I'm persuading other people that I seriously intend to retire, which then hopefully would urge me, would nudge me into finally being able to face the world and say, I have well and truly retired. So you mustn't mind that I seem to be a little bit economic with the truth, especially if I happen to be working on something and I'm embarrassed to admit that I'm still working on something. Also, I have a natural inhibition about talking about anything which I have not yet even begun, even if it's in my mind. Yes. I hate to say I'm working on this, I'm thinking of working on this. It's just one of those inhibitory things. Good. And really, by the time we were speaking, I'd probably given up writing chronicles, even though I'd had it on my mind for a number of years. And as you know, I was always looking for a novel like that. I wanted space, I wanted time, uninterrupted time. And I had decided I was never going to find it, even just to make a beginning. It's the kind of work for which I needed to get out of Nigeria to be able to write, because I was writing essentially in a very troubled way about Nigerian development, evolution, whatever, that work in progress. seemingly a permanent work in progress. So I needed to get away from the shocks, daily surprises, to stay in a little hole, cut off the media, no newspapers, absolutely no communication with anybody, so I could even begin to work on it. That is ironic because at least for some time, I ran a kind of residence for writers where they could retreat, and researchers we could retreat into, forget the world, and eat off the land. That was actually working until COVID put temporary stop to that anyway. So I couldn't even use my own residence because just being there was still remaining exposed. So I had to ask my colleagues, can you find me a residency for about 2 weeks so I can... So finally, one young Matthias, his name is, offered his village cottage near the sea where I was blotted out of the whole world. And then I was able to write a chunk. And then, of course, I had to go back to real life, then wait again several months until I found yet another hole in Ghana. This was very different, baronial splendor. I was fed 3 times a day, whether I liked it or not. But the staff gained more weight than I, because they were responsible for my feeding. They would come every day. What shall we prepare? And I said, please leave me alone. They said, well, we recommend this. So I said, yes, please go and get it. So all of them put on weight by the time I left that place. I was the only one who lost weight. But the novel gained weight. Then the final chunk, after I went out, real life again, then came COVID.
Yes.
And the lockdown. And fortunately, I was able to rush back to my forest cottage. And there, I had nothing else to do but to work on the novel. So you see, I intended not to write, but it came anyway.
Circumstances.
Force of circumstances.
Yes. So, writers often speak about continuing to grow as writers. At this stage in your career, is there a way that you see yourself still growing as a writer? And if so, how would you describe that growth?
Well, even though from time to time I've referred to myself as a writer, I've never really considered myself as a writer. I'll explain. I have been involved in so many things, and there's so many things, other things I want to do, that I fear maybe, how could I be guilty of that? Excuse me. Let me just kill this off completely. You didn't hear it. That's technology for you. Yes. Among other things, for instance, I describe myself as a frustrated musician, as a failed architect, probably even a culturist. I try to make up for that particular lack in consumatory ways. And one of these days, I might even go up in space and become known as an astronaut. So there's so many things that I feel I've always wanted to do. I nibble around some of them because the others are just fantasies. If I were able to persuade myself that I'm nothing but a writer, I wouldn't get into so much trouble. But unfortunately, there is that instinct towards literary creativity above all else, and that's what gets me into trouble. But I still keep denying to myself, I think, that I'm a writer, so that I don't get into too much trouble elsewhere.
Yeah. So, of course, you write, whether you mean it or not, whether you intend to or not. But I would suggest that, especially in Nigeria, you do have two constituencies. There is a constituency of readers who encounter you in your books. But then you are also as close to a social phenomenon as one is able to find anywhere in Nigeria, because I've traveled with you a bit. And I remember on one occasion, you arriving at the Enugu airport on our way to Nsukka and then to Makadi ultimately. And the entire airport emptied out, and people followed you to the car that took you. These were staff of the airport. I'm sure somebody in the control room abandoned the control room because Wole Soyinka happened to have arrived. And as you went up the stairs at the University of Nigeria where you were received, you were mobbed. It was just chaos. And yet, a lot of the people at the airport have not read your work, but they have a kind of intuitive sense of your ethical capital. What does it mean for you? Because you keep professing that you're a very private person, but there are impositions. I know that a lot of people come up to you and say, selfie, and you particularly hate selfies, don't you? But how does it feel? Because I was going to ask you a question actually about COVID and the lockdowns, and how did you fare as somebody who is so used to being mobbed whenever you show up in public? How did you fare in that private shell, if you like, enforced shell? But also, what does it mean that wherever you go in Nigeria and elsewhere, you are recognized and people sort of crowd around you?
That is part of the contradiction of existence, what you wish for yourself and what you actually get. My young brother, Mr. Guna, I wish you luck. Where are you?
He's right there.
Yeah, okay. Since I encountered him, I've been a very happy man. Because when now I'm looked on as some kind of freak, that's more or less what you described. You didn't use the word. I can always say to them, listen, there's a newer freak. His name is Guna. Yeah. That's him over there. Go and harass him and leave me severely alone. But one of the reasons I built my house in the forest, and I did build it in a forested area, development, of course, has brought the town closer to me. But for a number of years, I was literally the only person living in that huge estate. And I think that period was one of the most satisfying periods of my entire existence, in which I could just slip out because there were some very obliging creatures.
Yes.
Some 4-footed, some 2-footed around. And all I had to do is step out, and see if any of those creatures would walk across my gun. And that was dinner or lunch. And from time to time, of course, people, would come and see me, and most of the time they got lost. That included the state security agencies looking for me. There was a village not very far, and they would have to go to that village to say, we understand that Professor Soyinka lives somewhere around here. We are friends of his. And they would take a look at those secret police and they say, oh, yeah, yes. We know, we've seen him. He lives over there, whereas my house is in that direction, which is very, very pleasant. But these days, it's become a little bit more difficult. At one time, I thought I had a reprieve when I used to be mistaken for Kofi Annan.
Yes.
And I enjoyed being Kofi Annan.
Yes.
You see, it isn't that I don't like to meet people. I just enjoy meeting people as other people. The one I didn't like was that
Morgan
that
Freeman.
crooked boxer,
Oh,
Don King.
Yes.
That used to make me mad. I would say, Don King, your father. But the most recent and lasting has been the actor,
Morgan Freeman.
Morgan Freeman.
Yes.
And I don't know what to do about Morgan Freeman. He is so popular. Uzbekistan, in France, I mean, especially in France, the immigration people, they would find a way of passing my passport around, and then they would look doleful. So, other times, however, I would find people who insist on Morgan Freeman. I don't know how many autographs of Morgan Freeman I have signed just to have some peace of mind. Even Sani Abacha was looking for me as a dictator in Nigeria. And I had to develop all kinds of disguises. Actually, I rather enjoyed, in a perverse way, that period, because it meant I could be somebody else under my disguise. I had at least 7 hats at one time, including a Rasta, just so I could sit outside a cafe and enjoy being anonymous. So it's a, as you say, it's a contradiction. I have no objection. It's not that I'm not, all my friends know that I'm not antisocial. I just don't enjoy the burden of being Wole Soyinka. That's all. That's the problem.
Well, since we're in South Africa, I'd like to ask a question about your relationship with this country.
With this country?
Yes, because when you won the Nobel Prize, the lecture that you gave, this past master address is present, has a very important moment where you talked about a sense almost of fracture that South Africa was still under apartheid at the time when you were receiving this honor. Since South Africa's emancipation, you have been coming to this country to give lectures, but they've given you quite a bit of trouble too, especially the immigration folks. And I believe that there was a little bit of hiccup even on this trip, so that you almost didn't make it to this country. Can you talk about what South Africa meant for you, even in the 50s, late 50s, when you were a student at Leeds University, and then when you won the Nobel Prize, and the way that you follow the drama in South Africa today?
Well, South Africa represented for me from very early, you can call it a life mission. South Africa was sort of the negative summation of how the world viewed the black person, the African. And so from very early, and that includes, by the way, the experience of the slave trade, which I wasn't involved in, I only read about it. It included colonialism, which of course I was involved in. It included the experience of racial discrimination on my own soil in Nigeria when I was young, and I was in school, in which there was the European quota, and Africans were not allowed in those quarters. Now the Broad Street area, you know, there was a European church. It included certain hotels, like the Bristol Hotel, I remember, when, even when at the beginning of my career, university career, in the University College, before I went to Leeds, in which, in Bristol Hotel, you were not allowed, as a black person, to come in there, and one or two other places like that. But South Africa, to be made to become aware of a place where it wasn't just the occasional act of disregard, of disdain, but that this was the daily, continuous reality for a people in the majority and people with whom I shared a racial identity. This became just something I couldn't live with without contesting, and contesting on a level which almost became the summation of my existence, which is why one of the very first plays I wrote, in fact, the first play to be performed on a British stage, was titled The Invention, and it was about apartheid South Africa. It was about racism. It is about the obsession with the black race as a group of inferior beings. I think The Invention, in fact, was reissued. Somebody, a South African scholar, female, found the script at the Royal Court Theatre and asked for my permission to publish it. I thought I hadn't published it because I felt it was unachieved. It was, as I said, one of my very earliest plays, if not the very first. And I had this evening at the Royal Court Theatre, which was half poetry, and the other half was invention. And I took part in 11 Men Dead at Hola, where some Mau Mau liberation fighters were beaten, clubbed to death by British colonial officers. These were the issues which obsessed me from very early. And I, together with a number of my colleagues, we felt that we existed to be trained, both intellectually but also physically, for one purpose only: to liberate South Africa and rebuild South Africa. And so, and of course, you know that my Nobel speech, I mean, I interacted early with some of the resistors, like the Reverend Father Trevor Huddleston. I used to go and listen to his his lectures as he toured England after he was kicked out by the apartheid government. Many people never heard the name Reverend Father Huddleston, but he was one of the earliest. I remember confronting him one day when he came to lecture in Leeds, and he was talking about recognition of the black, of Christ in the black man, the oppressed black person, and that this is why he did what he did. That's why he found this commitment as a Christian. And I remember taking him up in my young days. I was very brash, as you may have guessed, and saying, because I'd repudiated Christianity completely. And I remember contradicting him and saying, no, even if you were a Buddhist or a Muslim or whatever, you would still be what you are, a fighter for justice and for the oppressed. I remember we had this little exchange as my first year student in Leeds University. So, and of course we used to go and demonstrate outside the South African consulate in London before either the government, South African government, closed it down or the British told them to take a walk. I can't remember which was which. So it's a kind of irony then, isn't it, that each time I come to South Africa, there's a problem with the immigration. Once, and this was when I came together with Skip Gates and Connor West, in honor of lecture series in honor of Nelson Mandela. And I was held up at the airport. Now, it was in between engagements, of course, and I could not stop long enough to get a visa. So I told the Mandela Foundation, what was the name of the young man who was the secretary? Anyway, whatever his name was, that sorry, I have no visa. He said, don't worry, we'll meet you at the airport with a visa. Are you sure? I said, because I don't go where I'm not wanted. I'm more used to sneaking through barriers than being rejected. So it isn't that I've never smuggled myself through borders. I don't claim to be an angel. But I made sure that I would be met with a visa. Now, what I was told later was that in between the time I was invited and arrived, the South African Parliament had passed a new law cancelling
Privilege.
visas on arrival. How was I to know? My hosts were there. I couldn't believe it when I was told to take my bags and go and sit in a side room and wait. There was this fellow, his name Malala, something like that. Anyway, the secretary, he was doing his knots on the other side of the barrier. So I sat there, brought up my laptop, began to work. 1 hour, 2 hours, and they were making inquiries about me. 3 hours. What's going on? That's 3 hours. Found other people, including a bunch of scruffy students from the United States. They arrived with a bunch with all their rucksacks and their distressed jeans. I was neatly dressed. And there was this swept through, given their visas on the spot. I said, Madam, I came here to give lectures in honor of, the, quote unquote, the father of the nation. Why am I being treated this? So don't worry, we're waiting for Pretoria to sign off on this. 4 hours, 5 hours. I think after about 6 hours, the lady told me, yes, could you come in, please? So I came. I said, oh no, bring your bags and so on. And I thought, free at last, free at last. Thank Jesus, free at last. And she said, I couldn't really buy it. Sorry, I have to tell you that you have been refused entry into South Africa. I said, okay, thank you very much. Packed my bags, and then they said they were going to put me on the next plane. I said, no. This side is South African side. That side is international airport. You just throw me to the other side, and I will take whatever is the first place coming out of here. I don't give a damn where it's going. So you don't choose my flights for me. I have my credit card. I will buy my ticket. I'm going to sit there. So I moved in. And it was while I was there that they came, some people, immigration, they came for me and said, oh, it's okay. I said, no. I'm leaving. And then I was informed that Gracia Machel had hit the roof when she heard what happened, then began to make phone calls and so on and so forth. Well, on that note, I came in there, but I said the moment, it was 3 lectures, said the moment I finish my 3rd lecture, I'm leaving South Africa and I'm never coming back. And I packed my bags to that lecture and departed straight from the lecture to the airport. Now, it's interesting how and for about 2 years, I rejected all invitations, including outside events in South Africa. What ended the strike? I was in a Nigerian airport one day, meeting somebody, and I was on the arrival side. And I saw a familiar figure with his bushy hair also, different from mine, but bushy. You know who that was, of course?
Dennis Brutus.
Dennis Brutus. So I looked, I said, Dennis? He came, he was a bit short-sighted. Is that Wole? I said, yes. said, what you doing here? He said, I'm being deported. I said, deported from where? From here. He had a lecture in Port Harcourt, and identical circumstances. He'd been told there'd be a visa waiting for him. No, instead it was his passport which was seized, and he was awaiting for them. I said, no, we cannot have this. So I went to the immigration office. I said, do you know who that is? I said, that's Mr. Bolts, Knuckles, and Bones. He said, what? I said, Bolts, Knuckles, and Bones. You never read it? He said, no. I said, well, that's the author. And he was shot by apartheid police. And you want people to learn that Nigeria deported Dennis Brutus. I said, anyway, Dennis Brutus, I managed to get him into Nigeria. And suddenly, I regained my sense of humor. So it's been variations of that,
yes,
including this trip.
Yes.
Including,
Yes.
I had to say, listen, I no longer want a visa. Just give me my passport, because I'm due to travel to Paris. It's from Paris I was to come here. So please keep your visa. And it isn't that I'd made the application. Even before I traveled out the last time, I sent papers to the embassy saying, I'm about to travel. Could you begin the processing of my papers so that when I return, there'll be enough time, etc., etc. Everything was returned. They said, no, you have to come when you're ready with your passport. Okay. So in the few days that I had left in Nigeria, I went to first sent my assistant, they said I should come. I went there, did everything. They were very nice, by the way, the officials in that place, they were very nice. Before that, I'd even gone to the embassy to say, I'll be needing a visa, but I'm traveling just in advance. Anyway, I did all I felt I could humanly do, only to find that I could not even retrieve my passport to fulfill other engagements. My French Chronicles, the book we talked about, was being launched in Paris. The publisher had set up a program. By the way, that's another story. They are sadists there, publisher, French publisher. They nearly killed me with interviews.
Whoa.
So don't try it here. So anyway, eventually I was told, come for your passport, virtually on the eve of departure for Paris. And in the end, I was given just 90 days. The last time I was given 4 years. That was when I was staying in California, given 4 years. This time I got 90 days. Thank you. I'm not going to spend up to 10 days here. Just drink as much wine as I can and get out before they withdraw the visa. I don't know what it is. I have no idea what the problem is, honestly. But I've had at least half a dozen nasty experiences with South African immigration.
Let me sort of talk about a different kind of problem that you've had with not quite a country, but a personality in a country. You did say in the prelude to the 2016 elections in the United States that if Donald Trump became president, you were going to shred your green card. As it happened, Donald Trump got elected president, and you shredded your green card. As a consequence, I believe that when you travel to the United States, you have to go queue up for a visa. Have you ever rethought that decision? Have you ever considered asking the United States to reissue you your green card?
No.
Since Trump is no longer in office.
No, on the contrary, after Trump left office, the American embassy ambassador then had asked me very nicely, why don't you now take back your green card? And I said, no, it's not necessary. get my 2-year B1, B2 to travel. So why do I want a green card? Suppose Trump comes back tomorrow.
Then you shred it again.
No, he's contesting. That criminal is contesting to become once again President of the United States. And remember, and everything he said he was going to do, he set out to do. He began to build a wall, which he threatened to do. And he said during his campaign that even green cards, no, he didn't say that. I was the one who said, I said, look at that man. Even those who think they are permanent residents, I said, he's going to cancel their residencies. And he's going to review even those who naturalized as Americans, if they are not from Scandinavia, blonde, Aryan. I said, that's what he's going to do.
Yes.
And he did say he was going to, when he became president, he tried to review all, he said, in fact, he did make an announcement that all permanent residency cards had to be suspended and reviewed on an individual basis. So everything I saw about him, his racism when he was campaigning, which is where the problem began. More blacks were killed by police during Trump's campaign than at any other equivalent season. It was like they took their cue from him and they began slaughtering. I mean, this is before I Can't Breathe. But go and look at the statistics. And this man, I said, this man is bad medicine. Those of us who can get out, I better get out and not look back. And so to make sure I didn't make the mistake, I
Clipped. So.
But then, very shortly after, I got a notice from my favorite terrorist organization, IRS, Internal Revenue something, America. That thing called IRS. If you don't fear God, at least fear IRS. So I got a note from them saying I had to be audited. It was very strange. Okay. So I went to the embassy and I said, your people want to bite some of my royalties. I don't want to seem to be running away, so I want to go and answer their call. That is when I got my B1, B2.
Yes.
I wasn't even going to go back, not for anything. What do I want there?
So you were going to boycott America.
But I've been back since.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
I know.
I was invited
Yes.
to give some lectures, so
Yes.
I used the same thing.
Okay.
But if Trump gets back as president, I will declare war on the United States. Personally.
Yes. So talking about declaration of war.
What about what?
Talking about war declaration.
Yes.
I have been reading your book, Trumpism in Academia, the example of Caroline Davis and sparring partners. So apparently, there are two scholars with sort of minor actors on the fringes who have suggested that your entire career was somewhat orchestrated by the CIA. And so you have written a very typical Soyinka-esque dismissal of these two scholars. Could you speak about, because a few years ago, there was this information that apparently CIA money had gone into Transition Chindaba magazine, which at some point you edited. So we go from that moment to the allegation now that it was the CIA that, in a sense, had shaped your career as well as the careers of other African writers. So I'd like for you to address that. For those who haven't had the opportunity to read this book, could you frame your response as briefly as possible? Or perhaps in detail, who knows?
Yeah, I'm back in the home country of this woman called Carol Davis, right? What's her name again?
Caroline
Yeah,
Davis.
okay. As a matter of fact, I've lost interest in Caroline Davis since she declined to appear on me. I declared that I was willing to travel to South Africa to engage her in a public debate to prove her right to write the things which she wrote, the allegations, the insinuations, all the innuendos, and to state that African writers, with Wole Soyinka at the lead, were made by the CIA. To the extent that she quoted yet another, that's Spar, something Spar, as
Juliana
her
Spar,
sparring
yeah.
partners. And even quoted that one as saying that I met CIA agents several times. I wrote and that this information was through dispatches by the American embassy. I wrote immediately a letter to the American embassy in Lagos, which I published in there, asking for assistance in exploiting the Freedom of Information Act, something like that, public thing, so that I could access and see for my own eyes, with my own eyes, just these dispatches which said that I claimed that I knowingly, I met CIA agents. And I asked also, my lawyers also wrote both Caroline Davis and Spar to withdraw the statement, or else prove satisfactorily that I'd met CIA agents. I said I've lost interest in the two of them actually because a new partner has arisen who, under the pretext of scholastic adjudication, has been trying to promote this canard. His name is Adekeye. He wrote a little book called The Trial of Cecil Rhodes, which was supposed to be a radical judgment, trial of Cecil Rhodes for his crimes against Africa. He was a Rhodes scholar, by the way. And he said, he began by claiming that when he was awarded a Rhodes Scholarship, his uncle called him and said, what? Rhodes, that man, his hands are dripping with African blood. And you're going to on his fellowship? So he said he thought about it and he decided that, all right, he would go and dine with this warlord, but, and I quote, that after he had concluded his studies and got his degree, he would then, I quote, bite the finger that fed him. This is the person who has joined the Carol Davis as yet another sparring partner. And in his strange form of adjudication, he blames me for being nasty in my writing about Caroline Davis. This is somebody who describes me as a CIA protege. To use, again, the kind of Yoruba language which I used earlier, those are fighting words. And when somebody makes that kind of claim against you, in my culture, you leave poetry aside you throw scholarship to the wind, and you say, your father and mother, CIA protégé. Your grandfather, your great-grandfather, your ancestors, CIA protégé. That's where you begin. And then, in addition, however, and this Adekeye pretends not to see this expose. You take this woman's allegations one by one, and you demolish them. You show where there are contradictions, and you say this is unworthy of a scholar. You tell that person, you did not do enough research. If you had done, you would have seen how a number of us, when we discovered, by the way, I forgot to add this, yes, CIA was pumping money everywhere through all kinds of organizations and so on, and a number of us in our projects did unquestionably benefit from this loose largesse all over the place. I suppose we're supposed to examine every currency and see whether the CIA thumbprint was in. When they were fronting, they had so many fronts between their organization, wherever the headquarters is. They set up the Congress for Cultural Freedom in Paris. They set up Encounter magazine with poets like Auden and some of the Kermode, some of the most brilliant scholars and poets in England. They pumped money into an already existing cultural center called Mbari in Nigeria, which benefited writers, which smuggled literature out of apartheid South Africa and published those poems. We smuggled out the first volume of Dennis Brutus's collection of poems. And then this scholar, I quote in inverted commas, then literally declares all African writers as products of CIA process. I find that dirty and despicable. And this Adekeye expects me to use a different kind of language. And he's supposed to be a Yoruba. Supposed to be. Well, even Yoruba society is not guilty of slaves, of not innocent of the culture of slaves. And some are born slaves. They grow up with a slave mentality. And that is all I can say about this new partner of Carol Davis, who tried to pretend. I don't know what's between the two of them, you know. Here I'm dealing with Carol Davis quite satisfactorily in my own language. This fellow countryman comes and thrusts his snout into my business. So I'm challenging him here to meet me on any platform. Forget Carol Davis now, just the two of us.
Yes.
You know. And when I make statements like that, by the way, people think I'm bullying. No. I just want us to exchange ideas. That's all. And I'm willing to travel back here anytime this Adekeye man, you know, who's published. I saw his book in the air in Cape Town. It was among the new publications. It's a 3-page supposed book review of my something, you know, in which he blames me. So that's part of the problems of existence. I said, what have I done to these people? I mean, I don't understand.
Yes.
You know, being an octogenarian should not be a crime. Being a Nobel laureate should not be a crime. People think that they have to come and throw slop at you in your ripe old age. I find that just disgusting. So I'm still waiting.
Yes.
And I'm waiting to see these dispatches, which claim that I met often.
Yeah.
Where did we meet? What poetry did we read together?
Yes.
I don't understand these people.
Or did they write for you?
Yeah. Did they write for me?
Yes.
I'm just bewildered. Yeah. I don't understand.
So let me get to a different question, because So you have a book that you've written as part of your intervention series, which you do with your Nigerian publisher, talking about Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Could you sort of state the position, because I haven't had the privilege of reading that book, the position that you stake out in this book?
I think part of the problem, which, and it comes, I believe, from our cultures, different cultures, but they seem to meet at one point, an exaggerated, excessive sense of gratitude. And this is what is misleading some of our leaders. At least misdirecting their moral energies. They're forgetting something, that the Russia of today is not the Russia that sided with African liberation. This is not the same country. This is a feudalistic, terrorist-led nation. Putin is not Gorbachev. Putin is not even Stalin, the arch criminal. It's a very different kind of leadership. Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union, but Ukraine is now a sovereign state. And I do not understand. Nobody, apart from I hear things like, oh, Ukraine crossed the red line. What red line? This is a sovereign state. And it's populated by human beings, not animals, like the ones who used to live around me, which I used to hunt for food. And Putin sits there, and from time to time, when he's bored, lobs some detonator at will. Russia is the aggressor. Why are we pretending? What is this sense of obligation that says we must side with Russia? This is not the Russia that sacrificed for us. This is not the Russia that offered help through Cuba. I helped Che Guevara wage a war of liberation within the African continent. There's a feudal, as I said, a feudal, totalitarian state which disposes of its enemies, not that there's anything new, by poison. It's just blown up another one of, anyway, that one deserved what he got. That's his problem, not mine. And this is a country which has been condemned again, like it has condemned the United States itself and Israel on very many fronts. I've been confronted with the argument that, oh, the United States, the Western powers are hypocrites. They have double standards. Well, who's denying that? I've been to Palestine. I know what we writers, how we mobilized on behalf of the Palestinian struggle till today. I've been received, interacted with Yasser Arafat. I know what that visitation cost us, writers, with our organization, Parliament of Writers, simply because while we were there, one of us used the expression Auschwitz about the detention camps which existed in that part of the world. I know what heavy price many progressive writers have paid simply because of their condemnation of the United States and the Western powers. So what has that to do with invading without a condition, a situation of aggression by Ukraine against the Soviet Union, against Russia? We're talking about a man, a leader, Putin, I don't know how many of you saw this iconic high five when some of the some of the countries were meeting on an economic summit. And as the group was walking along a certain corridor with a barrier on either side, and on the side there were some other leaders. One of them was the one who was found, who everybody knows and accepts, was guilty of the murder of the journalist Khashoggi. And when Putin passed, we walked and reached this crown prince, they looked at each other and high-fived this solidarity greeting of the black people. Now, that's the kind of person around whom some of our leaders are circling and praising simply because double standards are being followed elsewhere.
So,
I'm very much aware, by the way, that when this war began, racism raised its head in Ukraine. Nobody is disputing that. But talk to some of our students who studied in Russia, the Soviet Union. You'll find examples of racism there also. Some of them have horror stories to tell. We were aware of that at the time. We overlooked it. We told them, okay, shut up. It's just sacrifice for the cause. These are our allies in the liberation struggle for the African continent. So please take it. It'll be remedied. We'll talk to them, and so on and so forth. So what's new about that? We condemned the conduct of Ukraine at the time as was proper. But that does not justify the massive onslaught of Russia against Ukraine. If we permit that, we must not complain if on the African continent a force chooses to recolonize, to re-enslave us, then let's not complain. And it's already going on. A new round of annexation is going on the African continent today. And spearheaded by who? By the Wagner Group. Annexation, yes. We warned quietly at the time, said something is going on here. We cannot drop a set of chains and then, as mature people, put our necks in another bunch of chains. Liberation should be total, should be continuous, should be sustainable. There's autonomy, there should be pride in being independent people. We do not need just to tie ourselves to the bandwagon of any nation any longer. It doesn't matter what credentials they offer.
I'm going to, the trouble with having you on stage is that there is never enough time. In fact, not enough time to complain that one doesn't have enough time. But there's a question that a lot of young people insisted that I ask you. One of us on stage, and it's not me, as a young man, stormed a radio station in Ibadan at gunpoint, to stop the announcement of an electoral, the outcome of a fraudulent election. After the most recent Nigerian elections in February, the vice presidential candidate of the Labour Party gave a TV interview where he essentially claimed that his ticket won the election and warned that the judiciary should not swear in the man who had been announced as the winner. Subsequently, you went on television and you accused him of being fascistic in his take. So a lot of young men said, we were looking up to Soyinka. He went to a radio station to stop what was an impunity. What has happened to Wole Soyinka today?
Oh, consistency.
Oh, good.
That's all. Truth matters to me. Truth. Our problem is that many people, they look for shortcuts. Well, I do too sometimes. But I do my homework first. The election you're talking about, which took place in Western region, this notorious gunman episode, which in fact for a long time I insisted on being coy about. I always said, I'm sorry, I was tried and I was acquitted, which is true. I said, don't you believe in the Nigerian judiciary? What more do you want me to say? But I want to stress the fact that I was right in the thick of that election. I also collaborated with a radio unit installed in Okey Ndibe, through which we were announcing the correct results as we obtained them from the various polling booths. You know where that radio station, it came from your part of the country, and we inserted it into this, the House of the Opposition. We collated results, and then Ukono would broadcast would broadcast the result from that spot to Biafra, where it would then be rebroadcast to the whole nation. In other words, I had, and we had, the facts on our hand. And the Prime Minister, the Deputy Prime Minister, went on air to boast that they had won. Before the elections, he said, it doesn't matter, it was a fascistic regime. And he went on air and he said, we don't need anybody to vote for us. Whether you vote for us or not, the angels in heaven have already voted us in. That was his statement on radio. They were determined, and they were a brutal lot. The atrocities which they committed were enormous. We witnessed it at first hand. And so I wasn't relying on third-hand information about the election results. We contested throughout. We did our work solidly. Now, these recent elections. It's unfortunate that because the two things happened, first of all. One party, well, which party isn't, but in any case, in this particular instance, one party took over the labor movement, which is one of my favorite movements also. And then it became a regional party, more than, whereas it was a marvelous breach into the established two camps. Peter Obi achieved something remarkable there, that he broke that mold. Yes, however, he did not win the election. Let me remind you of a movement called Take Niger, Take Back Niger. Later on, remind me to ask what's happened to Ngozi Iweere, who was one of the I've been looking for her. And she was one of those who, during that period, succeeded with the aid of friendly countries in creating, if you like, a parallel INEC, which was embedded in the Surulere area, trained masses of motorcyclists, empowered them with radio, cameras, all this. Okada, we call them Okada riders. Use them as monitors throughout the entire nation. They were trained in a secret house in Lagos, in the heart of Lagos. You wouldn't know that there were all these consoles, down there, and broadcasting equipment, laptops, etc. And so the elections have been regularly monitored by that unit. It's no longer there in its original form in 2014, but the scraps are still there. In addition, my own organization has a monitoring unit. You know the one I'm talking about. And so I could say categorically that Peter Obi's party came third, not even second. And that the leadership knew it. But they wanted to do what we call in Yoruba, gbajue. That is, you have force of arms. You also have force of lies. And it was gearing up towards violence. They were going to send, some of the hardliners were going to send crowds, young people, into the streets to demonstrate. I'm always ready to be among such demonstrators, but only on the banner of truth, not of lies, not of deceit. We've had that kind of scenario before. Remember, this same Buhari, who proved a useless person anyway, in which the youth corpers were killed. The students I was recruited as monitoring agents, returning officers, and so on. Because of their uniforms, they became targets. I was instrumental in working with some of our governors in extricating those youths from where they were hiding. They were brutalized. And now, this party wanted the same thing to happen, and on the basis of a lie. And we found this vice presidential candidate on television, boasting and insisting and threatening and menacing, trying to intimidate both the judiciary and the rest. What kind of government would result from that kind of conduct, do you think? In addition, and this is the worst part, they didn't know it, but they were being used. Before the elections ever took place, there was a certain clandestine force, a reactionary. It included some ex-generals who were already calling for an interim government before the elections began. Interim government, some of them even went and demonstrated, and some of them were well-known figures, including even the proprietor of a university, calling for an interim government before elections ever took place. And so the party was playing into the hands, maybe not consciously all of them, but some definitely, trying to create a situation to bring back the military. That's what I was against. And before then, I'd already sent 3 emissaries to that leader, saying, curb your supporters. Just tell them to be on their guard. If you lose an election the first time, what does it matter? I said, you just tell them to stop threatening, to stop intimidating people. So it wasn't something new. It wasn't something spontaneous. No, I had to stop their getting the youths on the street to be slaughtered. And for what? For a lie. This, for me, was unacceptable.
So I have just about 1,000 questions to go, but I did promise Dele, my younger brother, that I was going to involve especially young people, students. So I'd like to take a question, and if Dele permits, 2 questions from young people. So are there? Okay, so to that side, who has the microphones? Yes.
Is it on?
Could you?
Okay. Hello. Thank you so much for such a riveting conversation and discussion. I think I can speak on behalf of the students that have had the honor to be invited by our rector to be part of this conversation, that to have such a notable figure here with us in Stellenbosch is really momentous. The question that's coming to mind, or rather the thought is, as a young African writer and an academic that sees what is essentially what people call an emerging polycrisis happening, where we are being asked and we are being taught now to think of the world's problems in multitudes, with this lens of multiplicity. How do we balance seeing and experiencing these multiple crises while dealing with our own becomings in the world as it is, not only today, but what we are seeing it become? And also any advice that you have for sort of young academics or writers in the landscape that we're in now to stay true to the truths that we are also dealing with as we become. Thank you.
Yeah, could you repeat that? Because my hearing aid I get echoes.
So part of the question is, what advice do you have for young writers, young intellectuals, and especially in the context of the crises that are present in their world? So what advice would you give them for navigating these challenges? Is it a fair paraphrase? Yeah, so the polycrisis, sort of the political crisis that sort of deluge our world today.
Well, the first warning, caution, which I always give to young writers is that your primary mission, if you say you're a writer or you want to be a writer, then your primary mission is your literature. Don't feel that you are obliged to throw yourself into the maelstrom of events. If, however, your temperament guides you that way, if you cannot be at peace with yourself, at peace sufficiently to do what you want most, which is to write, then obviously you have no choice. Mm-hmm. You must allow yourself to get sucked into the turmoil, one way or the other. But please do not be influenced by the social media, either in your writing or in terms of opinions which are expressed in the social media. Just form your own ideas, examine as intelligent people, otherwise you wouldn't want to write in the first place. Examine the circumstances, the environment in which you are, how it is impinged upon by other events outside, and then take a position. It doesn't matter if it proves to be wrong. At least you are acting according to your conviction, and then you are at peace. You can then confront your literature. You can even use your literature to promote whatever ideas you have. But above all, please just avoid the easy way out. Avoid trying to be seen as being radical for its own sake, simply because that strikes you as a romantic and progressive kind of position to take. No, be satisfied in yourself that this really works for humanity, because that's at the basis of it all. Ideology, religion, ethnicity, the whole lot, it's all about humanity, an indivisible humanity. That has always been my guiding principle.
Good. Dele, do we have your permission to take one more question? Or should we just keep it going? All right, one more question, please.
It's not a question, but just to say something about a little bit funny and devious intellect of Professor Soyinka.
Yes.
One time I was invited to his forest house. As we were driving the bumpy road, we saw a nice sign. It said, "No trespassing.
Yes.
Anybody trespass will be shot, killed, and eaten." So he's a hunter.
Yes.
So he made that.
Yes.
I thought it was just a nice interjection.
So for those of you who couldn't hear him, that's
Look, that's, I know him.
I know you know him. So that's what somebody who's been a guest at Soyinka's forest retreat, and he's speaking about the sign as you approach this retreat, saying, "Do not trespass. Those who trespass will be shot and eaten." So,
No, okay. Let me give the right quotation.
please,
He's taking poetic, he's a writer.
Poetic
He's
license.
taking poetic license. All it said was, I quote, trespass. And why did I put it up? This place was such a magnet that I would arrive thinking I was coming to my peaceful sanctuary. I find even families camped there. They brought their children on my grounds. And here I'm thinking there's nobody living there at the time. So I had to put up a notice. Trespassing vehicles will be shot and eaten.
oh, his
The
vehicles.
vehicle is important.
Yes.
Then it was later on, I had a flurry of cow invasion.
Yes.
I don't know if you people have heard about the
Herdsmen.
the Fulani herdsmen problem. They trample over crops, they become a nuisance. Some of them even carry AK-47s. You know, they're supposed to be just rural herdsmen. They become, in fact, a terror organization, right? And a couple of times they invaded my territory. So I had to take certain precautions. And before doing that, so people wouldn't accuse me of being a cow hater or anything of the sort, so I put up a notice, trespassing cows will be hanged. And of course, with the implication, will be barbecued.
Yes.
And I sent a notice round and saying, this is the new rule. Any cow which trespasses will be tried, found guilty, hanged, and turned into barbecue. And the entire village, I said, will be invited. It worked. No cow has trespassed ever since.
Ever since. Yes, please.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Pyoguhle Kabaka. I'm also a student leader at our institution. So one of the things that was a highlight within our term within the SRC was our visit to Nigeria. We went there in July. We visited the University of Lagos. So there's this thing, if most of you don't know, it's called Umoja, where as African universities, we come together as student leaders and, we discuss issues within our continent. So one of the discouraging or disheartening things to experience while I was there, which I think is the same pretty much throughout our whole entire continent, where as activists within the space of higher learning, we are seen as chaotic, we are seen as disruptive. I mean, it's just not a welcoming environment for us, right? So it was disheartening for me to hear that students in Nigeria don't have the freedom and expression that we have in a way, because they were expressing how pretty much speaking to the management of the institution and trying to resolve issues within the ground and within the students, they are immediately shut down. They're immediately being told, you're not allowed to protest, you're not allowed to do this. And part of us being activists, if you cannot listen to what I'm saying to you at the table, or you're not giving me that opportunity to get there, then exactly how are we supposed to resolve issues of our campuses? So I would just like to hear your thoughts on, you are a past activist as well and a student in your time. What does our current situation look like now? And we've lost quite a number of, good leaders within our time because they've been discouraged over time. So I don't know, what would you say, or how do you view our stance right now on the way we conduct ourselves as young leaders? And what advice would you, put towards us on how we can, do better or what's going wrong? And are you actively assisting young leaders in Nigeria to gain their confidence, to still have the energy and, the need to speak up? Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so she was in Nigeria and went to the University of Lagos and met with student leaders there. And they said that they no longer have the freedom, the space to speak about some of the issues that they face within institutions. And so the short of it is that she's saying, what advice would you give, or what role have you played in encouraging these students to sort of develop the consciousness and the ability to basically use their voice in addressing the problems that face them?
Well, the student journal, the culture of student journalism, I agree, has gone down a lot. Student journals used to be, in fact, very informative, exciting, stimulating. These days, at least the ones have been, which come to my attention, it's like, I'm sorry, the worst aspect, I always should preface social media with that. It's like the worst aspect of social media is now being replicated in student journals, which means that they're not making the kind of impact which they used to make. They don't earn the same kind of, regarding and respect which they used to have. It's concerned so often with tawdry matters, sometimes pornography, even pornographic in form. And if they cannot produce collectively a journal that even former students, intellectuals, and so on would want to add to their own reading list, then they're doing themselves, quite a lot of harm. They're losing their voice. However, there are other means. They can develop, for instance, the kind of guerrilla theater, which we used to encourage and even and assist them in producing, in which they invade spaces with shotgun sketches on immediate matters. This then becomes talking points. They'll get invited to the radio or to television also to give opinions simply because they are impacting on the imagination and the prospectus of civil society. They also must learn they are too easily co-opted these days, much too easily co-opted. Some of them, in fact, and then there's the issue of student cults, which are being used by politicians for their own purposes, strong-arm purposes, simply for how much, for heaven's sake, to enable them to buy an extra bottle of beer. And then we having, as you know, an epidemic of human devaluation. And I'm sorry that students are allowing themselves to be part of this. Have students kidnapping for ransom, kidnapping for rape, even for keeping sexual slaves under by force. It's like the larger society. I mean, it's always penetrated, always attempted to co-opt, always attempted. But it's like there's a wholesale co-opting goes on. So the positive voices are no longer being taken with the kind of respect and concern that students used to enjoy. I interact with them a lot. Many of them come to see me. Some of them send me their writings, and I know there's still a very strong, positive corpus among the student bodies. It's just a question of their having to fight their way out of the co-opted or lethargic masses. They can also do music. They should know that they have the power of the music in their hands. And some of them are very talented. but let them also learn to direct that music the same way as somebody like Fela became radicalized from just social music and just leisure music, nothing wrong with that, but also understand that music can be a weapon. And make use of the handheld transmission means. Instead of using it merely to commit internet fraud and sell themselves out to the highest bidder, they can create a strong network force for change.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you.